This is the royal barge in which the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh travelled ashore when Britannia was anchored in harbours around the world. The Queen and Prince Philip sat inside the air-conditioned cabin, which was specially designed to ensure that they could be clearly seen as they approached forthcoming royal visits. Even at sea, official affairs took up several hours of the Queen's day, and the red boxes containing state papers would be flown or shipped out to Britannia no matter where she was in the world. The 2-metre-long built-in... There was even a collapsible swimming pool, which was sometimes placed here for the royal family to take a dip in. The veranda deck was also used during formal state occasions, for receptions, and sometimes for group photos.
Photo barn.
Friendly atmosphere, an invitation to have a drink here was highly sought after, especially by the Buckingham Palace staff when they were on board. During the Queen's Western Isles cruise around the northwest of Scotland, the usual strict protocol on Britannia was relaxed, and then the petty officers. You are now standing on the bridge, the main control point of the yacht. It was from this small area that Britannia was commanded as she sailed the oceans of the world. From here, the officers navigated, logbooks were recorded.
Press 1.
Pala binaksan mo muna. Sorry.
I'll give you a hand with the left. Good morning. Have you head up to level 3?
Britannia was a ship in which hierarchy was. It was reflected in everything who had served to the sleeping arrangements. Halfway down the pecking order came the petty officers and Royal Marines sergeants. This was their mess, or living quarters. The room you are now in was where the petty officers would relax, and their sleeping quarters were arranged in 4 bunk spaces off this area. Due to the warm and friendly atmosphere, an invitation to have a drink here was highly sought after, especially by the Buckingham Palace staff when they were on board. During the Queen's Western Isles cruise around the northwest of Scotland, the usual strict protocol on Britannia was relaxed, and then the petty officers would entertain the Queen and other members of the royal family here. Over 20 petty officers served on Britannia, with responsibilities ranging from radio supervisors and marine engineers to stewards and cooks. The Royal Marines sergeants, some of whom carried out security duties, while others formed part of Britannia's band also shared this mess. Now, as you continue on the tour, you will walk through one of the petty officers' bunk spaces. Accommodation for each man consisted of a bunk, which folded up into a seat, and a locker where he kept his possessions. However cramped these conditions appear, they were a great improvement on the previous hammocks that were used up until 1970.
Ay, ba't ayaw? Ba't ayaw ng 20? Yun na yun.
The Royal Marines formed a separate contingent on board Britannia, and this is where they lived and slept in their own mess, known as the barracks. Security was always uppermost in everyone's minds, and Scotland Yard detectives, along with a contingent of Royal Marines, always accompanied the royal family on the yacht. 9 of the Royal Marines acted as ceremonial guards, or sentries, manning the gangways when Britannia was berthed. Before Britannia berthed in any harbour, the Marines would search the seabed and surrounding area for terrorist devices and would dive daily under the hull of the ship to make security checks. Perhaps the role for which the Royal Marines were best known was as Britannia's band. 26 bandsmen of the Royal Marines Band Service, all trained musicians, were embarked to play whenever Britannia was on royal duty. Their repertoire was vast and varied, and in addition to being able to play perfectly the national anthem of each country the ship visited, they could also turn their hand to every type of music, from classical to ceilidh. A faultless performance was always demanded, and the Royal Marines Band rehearsed daily. But on a ship where silence was golden, this could present a bit of a challenge. Daily rehearsals normally took place as far away from the royal quarters as possible. The band added much pomp to Britannia's presence, at no time more so than when they conducted the ceremony of the Beat Retreat. This was performed after a state banquet to round off the evening in spectacular Britannia style. The band would take their places on the floodlit quayside, and as the guests watched from the veranda deck, the director of music would lead the Royal Marines Band in a dazzling programme of precision marches and military music. As you make your way out of the Royal Marines Barracks, stop to look into the unwinding room. This was the recreation space where the junior ratings would come to relax and unwind after a hard day's work, and where the Royal Marine Band would practice. Exit by the door and turn right to see the Naafi shop. The Naafi, a well-stocked shop, sold everything from toothpaste to tobacco. It sold souvenirs unique to Britannia, ties and t-shirts, crystal and cut glass, pens and plaques, all bearing the royal coat of arms and Britannia's cipher. The shop was used by all the officers and yachtsmen, and occasionally by members of the royal family. Princess Diana once bought a pale blue Britannia t-shirt for a young Prince William here, and the royal children would sometimes be allowed to visit the shop to buy sweets. The Naafi shop is now open to our visitors and sells a fantastic range of made-on-board fudge and other sweet treats.
Would you like to try a free sample today?
Sure.
Yeah? Which one would you like to try?
Creamy caramel.
Creamy caramel. There you go.
Thank you.
So it was all made on board, made in the Galleys, just behind us.
Yeah.
Would you like to try some fudge today?
No, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Spectacular Britannia style. The band would take their places on the floodlit quayside, and as the guests watched from the veranda deck, the director of music would lead the Royal Marines Band in a dazzling programme of precision marches and military music. As you make your way out of the Royal Marines Barracks, stop to look into the unwinding room. This was the recreation space where the junior ratings would come to relax and unwind after a hard day's work, and where the Royal Marine Band would practice. Exit by the door and turn right to see the Naafi shop. The Naafi, a well-stocked shop, sold everything from toothpaste to tobacco. It sold souvenirs unique to Britannia, ties and t-shirts, crystal and cut glass, pens and plaques, all bearing the royal coat of arms and Britannia's cipher. The shop was used by all the officers and yachtsmen, and occasionally by members of the royal family. Princess Diana once bought a pale blue Britannia t-shirt for a young Prince William here, and the royal children would sometimes be allowed to visit the shop to buy sweets. The Naafi shop is now open to our visitors and sells a fantastic range of made-on-board fudge and other sweet treats.
Would you like to try a free sample today?
Sure.
Yeah? Which one would you like to try?
Creamy caramel.
Creamy caramel.
This tiny room had a large part to play in keeping Britannia a happy ship. For this was the mail office, where Britannia's post was brought to be sorted when the ship arrived in a new port. With the officers and crew away from home for long stretches, keeping in touch with family and friends was a huge priority, and the arrival of the post on board Britannia was eagerly awaited by all. It was always hoped that mail would be waiting whenever and wherever Britannia berthed. When the yacht was on royal duty, the Queen's official mail would be flown or shipped out daily from London, no matter where Britannia was in the world. Then, the ship's mail would join up with the royal mail, and the officers and yachtsmen could send and receive post daily via the Buckingham Palace Court Postmaster. Continue along this passageway until you come to the sick bay. The ship's sick bay and adjoining operating theatre, with their original 1950s fittings, have an austere and slightly ominous appearance. The sick bay had accommodation for 2 patients in the cot beds, with a further 2 bunks contained in the bench seat. In overall charge was the principal medical officer, who headed up the medical department, consisting of 2 chief petty officers, one in charge of the sick bay and the other a trained physiotherapist. Directly in front of you is the doctor's consulting room, with the operating theatre to your right. The ship's doctor looked after the officers and crew, but when the Queen travelled on Britannia, she was attended by her royal surgeon. Britannia was designed to serve not only as an official royal residence, but also to double as a hospital ship in wartime, complete with dental surgery, laboratory, operating theatre and X-ray room. However, this never proved necessary, and in 1992, this idea was officially dropped. From here, continue along the passage and turn right into the laundry. Britannia was the only ship in the Royal Navy to have a laundry permanently manned by her own crew. The laundry was larger than would be usual for a ship of this size. The extra capacity was required should the yacht ever have been converted to a hospital ship. When the ship was on royal duty, the 240 officers and yachtsmen might regularly expect to change uniform up to 6 times a day. With such vast quantities of washing, the laundry worked non-stop around the clock. The laundry also served the royal family. However, A careful schedule ensured that their washing happened on different days to that of the officers and the yachtsmen. A petty officer was in charge of the laundry, and he worked with a staff of 8 to ensure that all on board were immaculately turned out. Most of the equipment that you see here today is from the original 1953 installation. The laundry was a hot and noisy environment, and when Britannia sailed to the tropics, temperatures in here could soar to 45 degrees Celsius, or 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Up to 600 shirts alone could pass through the washers and dryers in one day. The laundry operated as a non-profit-making venture, and to cover costs, a small charge was made to wash and press each item of clothing. A shirt cost 6 pence, and a tropical white uniform was charged at 22 pence. The crew of Britannia always prided themselves on never making mistakes. However, this could never be totally true, and on one occasion, the royal washing turned a delicate shade of blue. Her Majesty's dresser was not amused. Fortunately for the laundry crew, the cause turned out to be a chemical reaction in the copper pipes and was quickly remedied. When you have finished looking around the laundry, exit via the door, which will take you onto the quayside, where you can see the royal barge.
Yes, this floor was worth it.
Britannia was the only ship in the Royal Navy.
Yes, there's a big difference between the
This is the royal barge in which the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh travelled ashore when Britannia was anchored in harbours around the world. The Queen and Prince Philip sat inside the air-conditioned cabin, which was specially designed to ensure that they could be clearly seen as they approached the shore. When the Queen was on board, the royal barge would be crewed by 5 men and escorted by one of the motorboats. The barge was built by Camper Nicholson in 1964 to replace the previous royal barge, which had originally belonged to the Royal Yacht Victoria and Albert III. It is 12.5 metres or 40 feet long and has 2 125 horsepower engines, which are capable of a maximum speed of 20 knots, although its normal passage speed is 18 knots. From here you can also view the royal yacht, stretching before you along the quayside. 125 metres of streamlined elegance. The glossy, deep blue colour of Britannia's hull was especially chosen by the Queen, in preference to the traditional black. The Queen, too, specially approved the elegant 24-carat gold leaf line around the ship's hull. Not a single rivet marks the yacht's sleek, smooth hull, and nowhere on her side will you find the name of this, one of the most famous ships of the 20th century. From here, continue along the ramp to see the engine room.
Maingay. 26.
Yacht Britannia stands as a proud testament to Britain. This is the gleaming engine room of the Royal Yacht Britannia stands as a proud testament to British marine engineering. It has barely changed throughout Britannia's life, and practically every piece of machinery, every gadget, stopcock, switch and dial operated faultlessly until Britannia was decommissioned in 1997. When America's General Norman Schwarzkopf was shown Britannia's spotless engine room in 1992, he was reported as saying, "Okay, I've seen the museum piece, now where's the real engine room?" And it is true that the engine room with its chrome dials and old-fashioned steam turbines has an air of antiquity. But this was the very heart of the ship, and it was these two engines which carried Britannia over 1 million miles, once round the globe, for every year of her life. The two pairs of shiny black cylinders, which you can see set into either side of the main part of the engine room, are the two high and low pressure steam turbine engines. Steam passed from the boiler room next door through the large pipe pipes into these turbines, which connect to the gearboxes. The gearboxes are, in turn, connected by 30-metre-long shafts to the ship's two propellers. The engine room received its instructions from the bridge via the wheelhouse telegraphs on the speed and movement of the ship. The engines are capable of developing a total of 12,000 horsepower and drive the yacht at 21 knots, a speed that Britannia was capable of providing throughout her life. At the front of the engine room, the sparkling chrome dials were used to monitor the different stages of steam pressures and vacuums, which were critical to ensuring the safe passage of Britannia. Manning the engine room was labour-intensive, and amongst the yacht's crew there numbered some 80 engineers. At any one time, there would be 8 men on duty in the engine or along the associated machinery rooms.
Royal Sailing. Dito tayo Royal Sailing.
Dalawang corgi pa lang nakita. 4 na.
And welcome to this tour of the Royal Yacht Britannia. You are now standing on the bridge, the main control point of the yacht. It was from this small area that Britannia was commanded as she sailed the oceans of the world. From here, the officers navigated, logbooks were recorded, and orders issued. Most of the equipment you see here was originally fitted in 1953. In the middle of the floor are the ship's binnacle and the gyro compass, which were used to navigate Britannia. The wooden one closest to you is the backup binnacle, which contains a magnetic compass, but it was only ever used if the main gyro compass in front should fail. Attached to each of them is a blue pipe with a chrome lid. These are the voice pipes, which connect to the wheelhouse on the deck below. By speaking into these pipes, the officer of the watch would give orders on the direction of the ship to the team of 3 in the wheelhouse. The men in the wheelhouse would then operate the officer of the watch, who is in overall charge. There would normally be a lookout and a signalman stationed here when the Britannia was at sea. Together, it was their job to ensure that everything went according to plan. But the man with the ultimate responsibility for Britannia and the safety of the Queen and crew was the Admiral, Britannia's captain. The only chair you see was for his use alone. In this high-pressured environment, everybody else was expected to be upstanding, always on the alert, for this was no place to relax. The room at the back is the chart house. This was where the navigating officer would plot Britannia's course for state visits, often more than a year in advance. When you are finished looking around the bridge, carry on through the doors, where you'll find point number 2, at the bow of the ship.
Tawa siya. Siya tumatawa.
Tayo din.
Parang ayaw na.
You are now standing at the front of the yacht, and from here you can look down onto the Royal Bridge directly below. Often, as Britannia sailed in or out of harbour, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh would watch from the Royal Bridge, waving to the cheering crowds on the quayside. The curved teak windbreak was a later feature, added for modesty's sake to prevent sea breezes from lifting royal skirts. Beyond the Royal Bridge is the cable deck of the yacht, known as the forecastle. It was from here that the anchors and cables for mooring Britannia were operated. In the centre of the deck, you can see 2 round capstans used to raise and lower the 2 anchors, which each weigh more than 3 tons. On the seaward side, you can see 2 signal lights mounted on a small platform. Britannia's crew used these to send messages in Morse code to passing ships. Continue round the deck to point number 3, which overlooks the funnel. The flag deck is the highest part of the Royal Yacht, and from here you can look out over the funnel deck towards the stern, where the royal apartments are situated. The funnel itself is no ordinary ship's funnel. It has a specially designed gutter to stop raindrops splashing and staining the pale paintwork, and inside it houses a tiny multi-gym, which was used by Britannia's yachtsmen. Set into either side of the funnel, you can see the circular steam sirens. One of the last times these were sounded was when Britannia sailed past John Brown's shipyard on the River Clyde during her final voyage in 1997. Then she gave a long blast on her sirens, in fond farewell to the yard which had so proudly built her. As a ship of state, the Royal Yacht has 3 masts. Hidden beneath the base of each are a number of coins, which were placed there in 1953 as payment to the angels to guard the souls of the sailors. Each of the masts has a gold top, which is actually a very decorative radio aerial. In the 1970s, modern satellite communications were introduced on Britannia, and the large white dome, which you can see on the flag deck, is the aerial for this system. The foremast rises up behind the dome, and the halyards, or ropes, on either side of the mast were used to fly flags to send messages to ships nearby. You can still see the flag locker where the flags were stored, each in its own individual compartment. When you are finished looking around the flag deck, take the tower stairs.
Dito sa kaliwa.
You are now on the shelter deck, and located here is the senior officer's accommodation.
Hinahawakan niya.
The first cabin on your right was for the commander, who was second in command to the admiral. On your left is the admiral's suite, comprising of day cabin, bedroom, bathroom and pantry, and, as befits his shelter deck, and located here is the senior officer's accommodation. The first cabin on your right was for the commander, who was second in command to the admiral. On your left is the admiral's suite, comprising of day cabin, bedroom, bathroom and pantry, and, as befits his standing, this is the most spacious and comfortable accommodation outside the royal apartments. Throughout her life, Britannia's 9 admirals, and finally Commodore, would work, sleep and entertain here. The armchairs and sofa are over 100 years old and came from the previous royal yacht, Victoria and Albert III. When the royal family was on board, the admiral would always dine with them. But when there were no royal passengers, the admiral would dine alone in the day cabin, allowing his fellow officers the chance to unwind away from the boss. Continue along the corridor, where you will come to the admiral's pantry. This is where the admiral's meals would be brought from the officer's galley and served to him by one of the stewards. Further along the corridor on your right is the cabin of the first lieutenant, a senior officer who was responsible for the organisation of the seamen on board. This typical officer's cabin is little changed since it was first used in 1954. Despite their high status, none of the officers enjoyed the luxury of an ensuite bathroom, making do instead with shared facilities. On your left, you can see the admiral's bathroom and sleeping cabin. The bathroom contains one of the few baths in this, the working part of the ship. From here, you can look through to the admiral's sleeping cabin with its row of sycamore veneered wardrobes. These held his immaculate uniforms, into which he had to change, often up to 12 times a day, depending on his duties. From here, continue along the deck outside until you arrive at the garage. When Britannia was built in 1953, a garage to house the Royal Land Rover, or occasionally the Phantom 5 Rolls-Royce, was considered an absolute essential. But it was no straightforward task to get the vehicle on board. First, the car and its transporter had to be hoisted onto the special track that is fitted into the deck. Even then, the Rolls-Royce could only be squeezed into the garage by removing its bumpers. In more recent times, a suitable car could normally be found in the country that the Queen was visiting, so the Rolls was rarely carried, and the garage put to use as a beer store. Overhead you can see the pulleys, or davits, on which the Britannia's activity boat and royal barge were stowed. The activity boat was often used to take the royal family ashore for private picnics during the Queen's annual Western Isles cruise. With a total of 10 boats and 18 life rafts, Britannia carried more craft than a warship. Towards the front of the ship on either side are 2 identical motorboats, known as jolly boats, and on the opposite side of the ship are the davits for the Britannia's 2 fast motorboats, which were used to escort the royal barge whenever the Queen was aboard. Together, these 5 boats played a crucial role when Britannia rescued over 1,000 people from war-torn Aden in 1986. From here, you can also see the ship's funnel rising up above you. To its left is the main mast, which marks the midpoint of the ship, dividing the Royal Yacht in 2. Forward of the main mast, the area from which you have just come, is the working part of Britannia, where the 20 officers and 220 yachtsmen lived in fairly cramped conditions. In the other direction, aft of the main mast, are the living quarters of the royal family and the 45 members of the royal household who assisted the Queen on state visits. As you continue along this deck, you will notice that the windows here are higher than anywhere else on the yacht. This is because these windows look into the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh's bedrooms. By placing them at this height above the deck, any accidental glimpses into the royal bedrooms could be prevented. Carry on along here until you reach. You are now standing on the veranda deck, part of the royal quarters of the yacht. It was here that the royal family could relax in privacy, sunbathing or enjoying games of quoits or deck hockey on this, the largest deck on Britannia. Prince Philip would occasionally set up his easel here and indulge in the royal pastime of painting. There was even a collapsible swimming pool, which was sometimes placed here for the royal family to take a dip in. The veranda deck was also used during formal state occasions, for receptions and sometimes for group photos. Then, the Queen and her guests of honour would line up, and the ship's photographer, Snaps, would set up his camera to record another historic moment. Hanging outside the sun lounge is Britannia's bell. Below the bell sits a replica of the oldest memento from a royal yacht, the white and gold 19th century carved binnacle from the Royal George, which is now in the visitor centre. The decks here, like all the wooden decks on Britannia, are made of 2-inch thick teak. Lined room was one of the Queen's favourite spaces on Britannia. It was a true family room and offered privacy from the rest of the ship. Here, Her Majesty liked to take breakfast and afternoon tea while enjoying the often spectacular views through the large picture windows. Prince Philip bought the bamboo furniture which you see in this room in 1959 during a visit on Britannia to Hong Kong. The wall panels with illustrations of former royal yachts cleverly conceal a drinks cabinet on one side and a record player and a games store on the other. The rum tub in the corner of the sun lounge dates from Queen Victoria's reign. It was used on Britannia to issue the yachtsman's daily rum ration up until 1970, when the Navy's rum issue was abolished. In between the windows, you can see the base of the mizzenmast, which cuts right through the sun lounge. From the sun lounge, move through to the vestibule, the area containing the principal royal bedrooms. The first window you come to looks into Her Majesty the Queen's bedroom. When Britannia was being fit, use of the bed linen bought for Queen Victoria's bedroom on the previous royal yacht. The Queen's specially tailored sheets had a large turnback and were embossed with the personal monogram HM the Queen. Above the Queen's bed, there is an embroidered silk panel which was specially commissioned in 1953 at a cost of £450. Now, as you make your way to the next window, you will see that the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh's sleeping quarters consist of 2 suites with an interconnecting door. Each room had its own bathroom. The Duke of Edinburgh's bedroom reflected the Duke's personal taste and has a more masculine look.
Let's go downstairs.
We had a look in here.
His pillowcases are the same size as the Queen's, but on his specific request, do not have the lace borders.
Sorry.
Do you like some colored in picture?
How did you say, darling?
Yeah, that's some colored.
Yeah? Go on, keep walking.
This room, known as the anteroom, together with the wardroom next door, formed the officers' main recreational space. Strictly off limits to the rest of the crew, these rooms were a sort of gentleman's club afloat. The officers would gather in the anteroom not only for drinks, but to watch television, listen to the radio, play games, or take part in Britannia's fiercely contested yacht quizzes. One memorable game peculiar to the wardroom was wombat tennis. This involved two teams, a soft toy wombat, and a great deal of noisy encouragement. The game commenced in earnest when the wombat was thrown up into the ceiling fan and the batting began. The wombat, which had been donated by a lady in waiting on the understanding that it would receive love and affection, generally came off the worse for wear. Another toy animal who made his home in the anteroom was the small wooden monkey. He arrived on board during the Queen's visit to Copenhagen in 1957, and although no officer was ever allowed to touch him, he mysteriously moved round the wardroom to be found in a different hiding place each day. Today, he is in the case behind the bar, hanging from the silver ship, which is actually the top part of a huge salt cellar, reputedly owned by the last Tsar of Russia. It was presented to the officers of the Victoria and Albert by Queen Alexandra in 1906. Although this was the venue for the officers to unwind and indulge in a bit of light-hearted relief, these rooms would often take on a more formal atmosphere. At no time more so than when the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh or other members of the royal family were entertained here for dinner or a drinks party. Then, etiquette prevailed once more. Around the lighting were pictures of the royal family, some of which date back to Queen Victoria's reign. The Queen and Prince Philip's portraits always took pride of place above the fire. The other highly treasured item in this room is the framed gold button, which came from Admiral Nelson's coat and is over 200 years old. It is just to the left of the archway leading into the wardroom. When you have finished looking around, move through the archway to the wardroom. Here, in the wardroom, Britannia's 19 officers would gather daily for meals and to unwind after a long stint on duty. This part of the room, with its elegant dining table, was where the officers ate their meals. Breakfast and lunch were more informal affairs, and the officers would come and go as they pleased, but dinner was altogether different. In the evening, the officers, sporting the Red Sea rig, the traditional naval uniform at sea, of a white shirt, black trousers, cummerbund and patent leather shoes would gather in the anteroom next door for pre-dinner drinks. A number of the junior yachtsmen were naval stewards, and it was their job to serve the fine cuisine prepared by the wardroom galley chefs and the excellent wines brought up from Britannia's wine cellar. As you make your way along this passage, you will pass Britannia's 3 galleys, one for the officers, one for the yachtsmen, and one for the Queen and the royal household. You may still see chefs working in this area, as nowadays the galleys are still used to prepare the mouth-watering dishes that are served at our spectacular evening events. When the royal family was on board, their food was always prepared by chefs from Buckingham Palace, who were specially flown out to the ship. Before Britannia set sail, the ship's holds on steam were stocked high with fresh, frozen and dried provisions. The cold rooms could hold 2 months' supply of fish and meat, and the dairy and vegetable rooms held enough provisions to feed the whole ship for a month. Fresh bread was baked daily, and whenever possible, local vegetables brought to supplement supplies. Carry on along the passage, and you will see on your left the Royal Cold Room, which used to be called the Jelly Room, for it was here that the royal children's jellies were stored. Next to the larder is the china and glass pantry, where the Minton and Spode's china for the royal dining room was kept. Every cup, saucer, bowl and salt cellar has its own specially designed compartment, hook or rack to hold it. The glassware, some of which dates back to the reign of Queen Victoria's son, Edward VII, is all engraved with the royal cipher. Next door is the silver pantry. Much of the silver in here is also Edwardian, and with Britannia's exacting standards, every single item had to be polished daily. Carry on along this passage and through the door at the end, which leads to the state dining room. You are now in the largest and grandest room in the Royal Yacht Britannia, the state dining room. Here, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh entertained their guests in spectacular style. Through these doors have walked some of the world's most powerful figures to accept the ultimate honour, an invitation to dine at the table of Her Majesty the Queen. Sir Winston Churchill, Rajiv Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Bill Clinton, Boris Yeltsin, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher all have taken their place in history aboard this royal yacht. What made a banquet on board Britannia quite unlike anything else was the careful planning, the minutest attention to detail, and the impeccable style with which the whole affair was carried off. It took 3 hours to set the 56 places for a state banquet, when the position of every knife, fork, and spoon was meticulously measured with a ruler. The menus, which were printed in French long before Britannia set sail, were given to each guest to keep as a souvenir of a very special night. In earlier years, the dining room also doubled as a cinema. Then, the large white panels at the end of the room would hinge back to reveal a film projector. The carpet could also be rolled up to expose a wooden dance floor beneath, although the last time this was used was for Princess Anne's 21st birthday celebrations. Nowadays, the state dining room hosts exclusive evening events, and those who are entertained on board still experience the same meticulous attention to detail and famed Britannia standards of service. Around the dining room, you can see many of the gifts which the Queen was given during state visits with Britannia. On this side of the room, there are, amongst other things, a ceremonial pig killer from the New Hebrides and a wooden carving of a shark from Pitcairn Island, signed on the back by all the adults living there in 1971, descendants of Fletcher Christian, the leader of the Bounty Mutiny. Look above the alcoves on this side of the room, and you can see a long string of red feather money bound at each end with leather. It was given to Prince Philip in Santa Cruz in 1957 and was reportedly worth £15 at the time. There are mementos arranged along the end wall in this part of the room. On the far left is a huge whale rib bone which Prince Philip picked up from a beach on Deception Island. Next to this is a sword dating from 1738, which was presented to the Queen by the Royal Swedish Navy. The glass display cases in the alcoves contain place settings for the royal dining table and gifts from countries as diverse as Malaysia, the Pacific Islands and Arabia, including a glittering display of swords and daggers. The last alcove on this side is home to, among other things, a stone figure of a man from Easter Island and a carved wooden tortoise from the Galapagos Islands. On the opposite side of the dining room, there are slate daggers and spears from Papua New Guinea, steel drums from Trinidad, a glittering gold head from Bangkok, and a Sioux peace pipe from the American plains. If you look between the doors at the end of the room, you can see one of the many electric clocks on Britannia. Like all the clocks on the ship, this was specially made for the yacht in 1953 and was controlled from the bridge by a master clock, which set the time throughout the ship. The clocks are now set at 3 as a permanent reminder of the last time Her Majesty stepped off the yacht. The dining table and Hepplewhite chairs are replacements for the original ones, which can now be seen at Frogmore House in the grounds of Windsor Castle, where Prince Philip has a special Britannia room. When you are finished in this room, move through the doors where you will find the Queen's sitting room. Although this room is known as the Queen's sitting room, it was really more of an office, for this was where the Queen would work on state business and meet with her private and press secretaries to discuss the fine detail of forthcoming royal visits. Even at sea, official affairs took up several hours of the Queen's day, and the red boxes containing state papers would be flown or shipped out to Britannia no matter where she was in the world. The 2-metre-long built-in desk with its green leather top was where the Queen sat to work, and here the royal writing paper, pens and blotters were kept. Above the electric fire is a mirror in the style of a ship's wheel, topped with a gold crown, the centre of which is positioned precisely at the Queen's eye level. The original sofa was used in HMS Vanguard in 1947, when the King and Queen, accompanied by Princess Elizabeth, travelled to South Africa. The 4 elaborate light brackets, painted in gold leaf, came from the steamship Gothic, and the built-in bookcase at the end of the room housed many of the Queen's personal books. Now, move across to the opposite side of the staircase to see the Duke's sitting room. The Duke of Edinburgh's sitting room was used principally as a study by both Prince Philip and also by Prince Charles. The same size as the Queen's sitting room, the teak panelled walls and red leather top desk lend a functional look to Prince Philip's study. Above the desk is a specially designed display case in which the Duke kept a model of HMS Magpie, His Royal Highness's first naval command. Both the Queen and Prince Philip's sitting rooms are connected by telephone to each other and to the offices of their private secretaries, one deck below. The telephones on the Royal Yacht are identical to those used in Buckingham Palace. Now, move through to the drawing room anteroom. This is the anteroom where the royal family and their guests would gather for drinks before lunch or dinner. Drinks would be served by a royal steward from the well-stocked pantry in the corner of the room. The anteroom connects to the drawing room with polished folding mahogany doors, which can either be fully opened to make one 18-metre-long room or closed over to divide the space in 2. Throughout the royal apartments, there is a combination of furniture from the Royal Yacht Victoria and Albert, like the mahogany bookcase you see here, and pieces which were bought specially in the 1950s. Over the years, every item has been carefully dusted, polished and cleaned daily to keep it in first-class condition, and nothing was ever needlessly replaced. On your right-hand side, you can see a silver ship model of HMS Thunderer, presented to the Queen by the Royal Naval Engineering College. The Queen was keen that Britannia should have the feel of country house comfort, rather than anything too formal or ostentatious. Indeed, the initial design scheme for the royal apartments was rejected by the Queen as being too elaborate and fussy, and instead, the architect Sir Hugh Casson was appointed, who worked in collaboration with the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh to produce the light, airy and restrained interiors with their white walls, brass metalwork and mahogany woodwork which you see today. When you are finished in the This spacious and elegant drawing room served both as a place for the royal family to relax and as a reception room. For official functions, the drawing room, together with the anteroom and dining room, could accommodate up to 250 guests. The drawing room is comfortably furnished with chintz-covered sofas and deep armchairs which sit on a luxurious Persian rug. The Queen originally requested an open coal fire in this room, but as Navy practice demanded that a sailor had to be on standby with a fire bucket at all times, this option was rejected in favour of the electric fire that you see today. The Welmar Baby Grand piano cost £350 when it was supplied in 1952 and is firmly bolted to the deck to stop it taking off in choppy seas.